What's up guys, my name is Liam and today we're going to be talking about the highly anticipated Darmoshark M3s Varun. This mouse comes in at under $50, has an incredible shape and weight. It's basically everything that we were hoping that we would get out of a Razer Viper Mini wireless. So, is this going to be the perfect gaming mouse for you? Let's check it out. And before we get started today, I want to let you know that metkeys.com sent this out to me, and you guys are absolute legends for that. Thank you very much. If it wasn't for them continuing to send me all these mice, these videos wouldn't be possible. And with that being said, they didn't tell me anything to say, so everything you're going to be hearing in this video today is going to be my truthful, honest opinions and my own words. Inside the box, once you remove the top, you do have the mouse sitting here at the top. And here we have it. I did opt for the yellow colorway. And then inside the box, you got these two boxes down here at the bottom. Inside the first box, it does come with a cable, and this cable does have USB-C connectivity. And then inside the second box here, this is gonna be the 2K receiver. And then you also get a dongle adapter. This also comes with a separate dongle, and you can use that individually, but that only gives you the 1K polling rate. And lastly, you also get a bag with some goodies in it. It does have a quick start guide. It also comes with a sticker, and they also provide you with a set of mouse grips, and you also get a set of smaller skates compared to the big skates that it comes with. Here's the dongle that gives you the capability for the 2K polling rate. You can still also use the 1K polling rate and adjust variable polling rates on this. They still also provide you with the smaller dongle, and this dongle is only capable up to the 1K polling rate. And when it comes to the larger dongle with the 2K polling rate, it does have a rubber bottom, so sticks nicely on the desk, doesn't move around on you, plugs into USB-C on the rear here. And then the front of this thing, even though it looks like it's some type of an LCD screen or something, it's not. It's just like a clear plastic, and when you have it plugged in, there's a little LED indicator that shines through at the bottom right here. Coming over to the bottom of the mouse, same stuff as before on the previous Darmoshark mice. In the middle here, you have your power button. When it's in the middle, it's off. It does give you the option of the Bluetooth mode to the left, and then if you were to switch it over to the right, that's how you'd connect it to the dongle. And then over here to the right, you have the return key, and to the left, you have the button to change your DPI. The skates that do come on the mouse, they're kind of rough. They worked fine when I was testing them out on the PadSmith glass mouse pad, so they had a pretty good consistent glide on there, but afterwards I was using the glass mouse pad. I tried them out on softer types of pads like the Lamzu Energon, and they do feel a bit muddy. But I really enjoy how they give you a lot of real estate with the skates. You can add your own custom setup with dot skates or whatever, which is what I will probably be doing eventually anyways. Back over to the top, I do feel like they've really improved on the shell on this. It feels a lot more sturdy and a lot more solid. I'm not getting any type of creaking, bending, or flexing on it. If I were to push as hard as I can, but with both thumbs, I can actuate the side buttons. However, I want to let you know that this thing is really solid. And when I was testing this out in game, I was really pushing hard, trying to give it the death grip. And no matter what I did, I wasn't able to get any type of flex out of the shell, any side button actuation or anything like that. So I do feel like this shell is a huge improvement and it feels great. They are using the TTC Gold switches and they feel pretty good. There is a little bit of pre-travel, nothing too major. If you are far up on the front of the mouse with the buttons, it does have some post-travel and it can smack up against the shell there, but if you were to push further back, it becomes less and less of an issue. And the same thing when you come over here to the right button, a little bit of pre-travel. Mouse button 1 and 2, overall it does feel solid. As you can see, there's almost no play going left to right. The only one issue that I did notice with the buttons and even just with the mouse in general is if you are somebody that likes to push down really hard on your mouse when you're using it, I do find that I do get some switch grinding on the front of this mouse. Though when I was gaming with this and using it all weekend, there was probably 1, maybe 2 times where I ever even noticed it during my gameplay. I do feel like the click implementation on this mouse is pretty good. It's pretty consistent all the way from front to back. It does become a little bit harder once you come back here in the rear, but overall I feel like it's very consistent. And I would say that the TTC Gold switches in here, they feel really good. A little bit heavier in my opinion than the Huano Blue Shell Pink Dots, but I feel like they feel really snappy and they give you really good feedback overall. The scroll on this, it feels great. It has nice light steps. It's really easy to actuate and spam. And the rubber on the scroll wheel, it works pretty good. It's not the grippiest I've ever used, but I feel like it does a pretty decent job. And when it comes to the side buttons, I feel like the side buttons feel great on here. They work good. They do feel a little bit more spongy than other offerings. They do have a little bit of pre-travel, And then after you actuate the switch, they have a little bit of post travel as well. You can actually push the button there if you push on them very aggressively, but I do notice that there's a little bit less pre-travel and post-travel on the front side switch. Coming over to the weight and balance, while having the dongle and the dongle cover in the bottom rear of the mouse removed, I do feel like this is just slightly a bit rear heavy. It does have a 500 milliamp hour battery towards the rear, so it is a really beefy battery. If you are using the 2K pulling rate, since I've got this out of the box, I would say that it's coming up on lasting me about 4 days. And then when it comes to the left to right balance, it looks like they've done a pretty good job there as well. And then finally, the weight with the dongle and dongle cover removed from the rear. Looks like we have this coming in at approximately 54.1 grams. So let's drop a sound test, testing out the overall clicks and build quality of the mouse. The 2K performance has been really great on this mouse. I was using it all weekend long, testing out various different games. I didn't notice any issues. It played really smoothly and it didn't have any hiccups along the way. 3395 sensor was tracking great on everything I was using, whether I was throwing glass pads at it or various different types of cloth pads. The first thing you're going to want to do after you receive this mouse and get it set up is you're going to want to download and install the software to get it configured properly. I believe my copy did come in at a 500 hertz polling rate, and it also came with ripple control enabled on the sensor. And once I got this installed, the first thing that I did is I made sure to disable the ripple control. I set the polling rate to 2K. And after I set my DPI, I came over here and I lowered the debounce setting to get my click latency as low as possible. And these are my personal settings that I'm currently using on the software for how I run this mouse. The shape of the Varun is incredible. And though it is a smaller style mouse, I do feel like it is kind of closer to some of the other medium offerings out there on the market. It has a nice gradual curve profile on the sides, but doesn't feel like the curves are too aggressive, and it doesn't feel like it's too flat of a mouse either. It does sit up a little taller and a little higher than something like the X2 Mini, but it does have pretty flat sides. It does flare out from the bottom to the top, getting wider towards the top, but as you can see, it's not too aggressive. On the top profile, it does have a rear hump as opposed to a middle hump. I do feel like the rear hump gives you a lot of stability and it sticks up, but as you can see here from the back, it kind of gives you a flatter and overall just a little bit more of a wider feeling in the hands. I'm a little bit surprised they did give us something with a rear hump profiling over the mid hump. I just assumed initially that this was going to be a shrunk down M3, but I must say that I do absolutely love the shape of this thing. It feels great in the hands and I truly don't have any complaints about it. And before we jump into the shape comparison, comparing this to everything else out there on the market, I figured I'd tell you really quickly about the mouse pad. This is a smaller style of a mouse pad. If it's something that you guys are looking for, it comes in at 360 millimeters in width, 300 millimeters in height, and it sits at 4 millimeters in thickness. It comes with the rubbered hexagon style base that you find on the bottom of the Razer Atlas. And I feel like the base feels great. It does a nice job, sticks to your desk, and it didn't move around on me at all while I was using it. They did a good job with the stitching on the side, and the stitching slightly sticks up just a little bit higher than the surface of the pad itself. And then it has this pretty cool looking design on the top. You can get in 3 different color options. You got the black and yellow here. There's also a white and blue. And lastly, there's a black and blue colorway as well. And though this is 4 millimeters in thickness, you can slightly push into it, but I would say it definitely feels closer to something like a mid base where it has a lot more firmness to it. It comes rolled up in this little baggie, so something you can attach to the side of a backpack or something like that if you wanted to take this with you somewhere and use it with your laptop. And the surface does feel really good. It feels like a cloth pad, but it is stretched pretty tight. You get very low initial static friction and it has a pretty fast glide overall. So I would say this is probably categorized somewhere more like a speed pad. It does give you a little bit of control during your glide, but it doesn't have very much stopping power to it. So first up, when comparing the Varun to the original Darmoshark M3. The curve profile on the sides of these mice is incredibly similar, but as you can clearly see here, the Varun is a much more narrow mouse. And then looking at the top profile on both the mice, as you can see here, the Varun has more of a rear hump, whereas the original M3 has more of a mid hump style. The shape is actually really similar on the top of these mice. The Varun is a more narrow and a less tall feeling mouse in the hands. So the final verdict between the M3 and the M3s Varun is that they're actually pretty much just the same mouse. The Varun is just smaller and it has a rear hump as opposed to the original M3 having a mid hump. Next, we'll be comparing the Varun to the VGN Dragonfly F1. These mice are very similar to one another when it comes to the overall size. I do feel like that they're both pretty equal when it comes to the overall width. I do feel like on the VGN Dragonfly, it might feel like it just slightly has a bit more aggressive of curves. And really some of the biggest differences when it comes to these two shapes is that the VGN Dragonfly has more of a mid-style hump, I guess you can say, but it does feel a lot flatter towards the top of the mouse. And coming over to the Varun, as you can see, it has more of that rear hump profile where it sticks up a little bit higher and it feels taller, giving you more support in the rear of the mouse. I do feel like these are two of the best offerings when it comes to these budget style mice, and I really like the shapes of both of them. They both perform great for me. Ultimately, I would say that it just comes down to whether or not you do want that rear hump or if you're looking more for a flatter style feeling mouse in the hands. Next, we'll be comparing the Varun to the Pulsar X2 Mini. The width of these mice are very similar to one another. I do feel like the curves are a little bit more aggressive on the Varun, whereas you can see here on the X2 Mini, it has a flatter feeling. The width of these mice are actually really similar to one another. The one difference is since the X2 Mini has less curves, it does feel just a little bit wider towards the center of the mouse. And as you can see here, the length between these two is pretty similar to one another. I do feel like, however, on the Varun, as you can see here, it does sit up a bit higher than the X2 Mini does. When you're looking at the front of these mice, you can clearly see the X2 Mini sits a bit lower, and it's pretty much the exact same thing in the rear. The rear hump on the Varun does sit up a bit higher than on the X2 Mini. I do feel like it feels a little bit more pointy here at the top, and it kind of curves off a little bit more aggressively to the sides. Though the hump on the Varun does stick up a bit more, I don't feel like it feels as pointy. It has a little bit more of a flatter feeling at the top of the mouse. And you can kind of see that with how it kind of curves out and falls off less aggressively from the top of the mouse down to the sides. So the best way to categorize these two is that the Varun has just a little bit more aggressive curves on the side of the mouse, and it sits a bit taller than the X2 Mini. Next up, we're going to be comparing the Varun to the Pulsar X2. On the medium-sized Pulsar X2, same thing as the X2 Mini where it has the flatter sides, but as you can see, the X2 definitely feels like a much wider mouse in the hands over the Varun. Clearly, the Varun does sit a little bit higher towards the front of the mouse. I do feel like the rear humps are pretty close to one another. And coming over here to the rear profile on the mice, as you can see here at the top of the X2, I do feel like it curves to the sides a little bit more aggressively, and it kind of makes the rear hump of the mouse feel like it's a little bit more pointy. The Varun curves from the top middle of the mouse to the sides a little less aggressively, and the rear hump on the mouse overall feels just a little bit more flat. So after comparing the Varun to the X2 and the X2 Mini, I feel like it feels more like it has the width of the X2 Mini, but it has the height characteristics of the original X2. And next up, when comparing the Varun to the Zowie ZA-13C. People often ask me what the closest thing is to a wireless ZA-13C, and though these mice do have their differences, they do feel pretty similar to one another, and this might be the most comparable option out there that's wireless and a cheaper option that comes close to the ZA-13C. Starting out on the bottom curve profile, when I was going back and forth between these two mice, I do feel like the curve profile on these are very similar to one another. The one thing that I do notice, however, is I do feel like the ZA-13C is a bit more of a narrow mouse in the hands. Coming over the side profiling, as you can see up in the front of the mouse, the ZA-13C sits much lower than the Varun, and it doesn't have as high of a hump over here as the ZA-13C does. And then coming over to the rear profiling on the mice, one thing that I definitely notice is, as you can see here on the ZA-13C, the top of the mouse just feels much more narrow with how the curve on the hump is from the top middle off to the sides. The top profiling on the Varun tapers off less aggressively, and it just feels like a wider mouse even at the top profile as well. And like I mentioned, even though these two mice, they do have pretty distinct differences and they don't feel anywhere near being a clone of each other, they actually do have a lot of similarities and they don't feel like they're that far off from one another. Next up, when comparing the Varun to the Razer Viper Mini Signature Edition. Starting out at the bottom of these mice, they do feel pretty equal when it comes to the width of one another. I do, however, feel like the curves on the Viper Mini are a little bit more aggressive, and it does feel slightly a bit more narrow towards the center of the mouse. Coming over to the top profile of these mice, since the Razer Viper Mini has more of a mid hump, as opposed to the Varun having more of a rear hump, there obviously is a difference there with the curve feeling at the top, but as you can see on the height of these mice, they are pretty similar to each other. I would say that the Varun is just slightly taller overall than the Viper Mini in both the front and the rear of the mouse. And then coming over to the back of the mice, as you can see here, I feel like at the top of the Razer Viper Mini, it does curve out and fall off more aggressively down to the sides than on the Varun, where the Varun just feels a little bit wider at the top of the mouse. And though these mice are pretty similar in size, besides the Viper Mini having the mid hump, the Varun having the rear hump, I do feel like the Varun just feels like a slightly bit larger of a mouse. Next up, when comparing the Varun to the Lamzu Atlantis Mini. Starting at the bottom profiling on these mice, the Lamzu Atlantis Mini definitely has much more aggressive curves than the Varun. Not only does it have more aggressive curves to the middle of the mouse, flaring out to the front and the rear more aggressively, it also has more aggressive curves on the side of the mouse, from the bottom being its most narrow point, getting wider towards the top. Another noticeable thing about the height of these mice, as you can see here at the front of the Lamzu Atlantis Mini, it sits much lower, where the Varun sits taller, and I would say the same thing goes for the rear as well. I feel like this hump is much more aggressive on the Varun. It sticks out more towards the rear, and it is a bit taller over the Atlantis Mini as well. And then coming over the rear profile, even though the Varun feels a bit wider in the hands than most, I feel like the Lamzu Atlantis Mini does feel a bit wider at the top of the mouse, having that real slow taper from the top of the mouse coming over to the sides. So finally, the bottom middle of the Lamzu Atlantis Mini feels a bit more narrow, whereas the top of the mouse feels wider, and then the bottom of the Varun feels a bit wider. And next we're going to be comparing the Varun to the Ninjutso Sora. Starting at the bottom of the mice, they do have a very similar curve profile from the middle of the mice flaring out towards the front and the rear. The Sora does sit a little bit lower towards the front. I do feel like the Varun sits up a bit higher than the Ninjutso Sora does. The rear hump on the Sora feel a bit more pointy and aggressive. And on the Varun, a flatter feeling of a hump, but it does feel like it sits higher up. These mice feel very similar to each other. However, I'd say the Varun does feel a bit taller. Next, we'll be comparing the Varun to the Vaxee NP-01S. As you can see, these mice have a different curve profile, but the NP-01S definitely feels like a much more narrow mouse over the Varun. And when it comes to the height of these mice in the front, they are fairly similar, but I do feel like the Vaxee sits just a little bit lower. And as you guys can see here, the Varun sticks up much higher, having a rear hump, where the NP-01S feels like a flatter mouse overall. And coming over to the rear of the mice, these do look pretty similar to one another, but overall I do feel like the Varun just feels a little bit wider at the top profile of the mouse as well. The NP-01S definitely feels like a bit of a smaller mouse compared to the Varun. Next up, we have the Varun versus the Finalmouse Starlight-12 in small. Coming over to the side profiling, I do feel like the curves on the Varun are a bit more aggressive than the Starlight-12 small. And the Starlight-12 small also does feel like a shorter mouse, and it doesn't feel as wide as the Varun as well. On the top profile, the Starlight-12 does sit shorter towards the front of the mouse, and as you can clearly see in the rear of the Varun, it has this more aggressive rear hump, where the Finalmouse has more of a mid hump, and it definitely sits a lot taller. The one thing about these mice, however, that make them feel pretty similar to one another is, as you can see here at the top of the mouse, the way that it curves off to the side, the feeling at the top of these mouse, they feel almost equally as wide as one another. Though you do have that more aggressive hump in the back of the Varun, and it clearly sits up higher. Though the Varun does feel like a bit of a larger mouse over the Starlight-12 small, they actually do have some similarities to one another. Alright, and finally we'll be comparing the Varun to the Starlight-12 Medium. I've seen a lot of people comparing these mice online, but they truly do feel pretty different from one another in the hands. As you can see here, the width on the sides, it looks very similar, but I do feel like the curves on the Varun, it curves more aggressively, whereas in the very center point of the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium, it does feel a bit wider over the Varun. I do feel like the centermost narrow point on the Varun is closer to the Starlight-12 Small as opposed to the Medium. Coming over to the sides of these mice, they sit pretty evenly as far as height towards the front of the mouse goes. But coming over to the rear of the mice, the Finalmouse does have this more middle hump, and the Varun has more of an aggressive rear hump sitting up taller. As you can see here, when you're holding the Varun, it does taper off more aggressively from the top middle of the mouse to the sides, making it feel like a more narrow mouse in the hands. The Starlight-12 Medium does taper off less aggressively, and it does flare out more towards the sides, making this feel like a wider mouse in the hands. So though these two mice do look pretty similar on paper, I do feel like the Varun feels like a more narrow mouse, and it has a taller, more aggressive rear hump. Alright, so that wraps things up for the Darmoshark M3s Varun. I have been absolutely loving this mouse. The fact that this mouse comes in with all the stuff that's included with it, it's included with the dongle, comes with grips, extra skates, everything. I really do believe that this is a real winner. I would say overall, since everything about this feels great, from the shape to the performance to the way it plays, I would categorize this as my #1 mouse that's under $50. Alright, so if you have any questions or feel like there's anything I left out, please let me know down in the comments below. Aside from that, if you've enjoyed watching this video and you're interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, please drop this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.